Let's talk about 5 ways that you might be disrespecting the consumers of your thought leadership content. When people find you, they discover you, and they continue reading, it's not just because of what you say, it's also how you say it. Regular consumption of your thought leadership content is what builds a relationship between you and members of your target audience. And at a certain point, they realize that they need your help with an issue they have, or an issue comes up, they realize they need your help, and they've been reading you for a while, and they understand that you have the knowledge and the insights and the wisdom to help them. But you're not going to build that relationship. You're not going to have them stick around long to read and consume your thought leadership content if you're disrespecting them. Here's 5 ways that you very well might be disrespecting the consumers of your thought leadership content. First, you're not using what I call signpost subheads. It's not fun to consume a piece of content where you don't really know which direction things are going and you don't have mile markers along the way to help guide you. I am shocked by how few attorneys use signpost subheads in their thought leadership content. These are subheads that just give the reader a sense of what the author is about to say. If you're going to give background about a topic, maybe you say a primer about XYZ. And then when you get into a court's decision, you might say the appellate court holds or the Supreme Court holds, and you get into the details underneath that. But if you don't have subheads to introduce paragraphs or sections, you're disrespecting your audience. They're not going to follow along, not going to continue reading because you're making it hard for them to do so. Another way you might be disrespecting the consumers of your thought leadership content is by not using white space creatively. Even if you have signpost type subheads, if you have walls of text, 3 paragraphs in between subheads that are long and bulky and just a pain to read, you're disrespecting your audience. When we see a block of text, we subconsciously think to ourselves, I can't deal with this. I'm going to skim it, or I might skip the whole darn thing entirely. But you should be using white space creatively to avoid those large blocks of text. You can have a 1-sentence or 2-sentence paragraph. You can have a bunch of them in a row. When you use white space creatively, you're respecting your audience because you are making it easier for them to read, to consume the content, and to work their way through the content and let them understand it and digest it as they go. Because obviously, it's easier to consume and digest a 1 to 2 sentence paragraph than it is a 5 to 7 sentence paragraph. Third, you're probably disrespecting your audience if you are not laying the groundwork or the context for the points that you're going to make later on. I see this a lot when I'm reading thought leadership content regarding recent cases or recent administrative agency actions. When you have a case and an attorney talks about the holding of the case, but doesn't explain earlier on in the article the foundational facts that led to a decision, a holding, in the manner that they're talking about. If in the holding, the court is relying on facts that aren't mentioned earlier, well, you as the reader, you're like, well, wait a second, this doesn't make sense. Where was that? I'm not following along. That's disrespecting your audience. Same thing when you're talking about administrative agency actions. I've seen content, thought leadership content, where attorneys are writing something about what the DOJ has done, or the SEC, or the FCC. And when they talk about the administrative agency action, they talk about it in a vacuum. They don't give the policy reasons or the economic reasons or any kind of context. And it makes it hard to understand, well, why did the SEC or the FCC come out a certain way? What influenced their thinking? If you can't give that to your audience, then all you're doing is telling the audience that something happened. You're not giving any guidance and helping shape the audience's understanding of why that result occurred, which is important for them as a takeaway and for them to apply to their own legal or business issues when they're dealing with that same agency or that same actor. Fourth, you're probably disrespecting your audience when you're not using enough segues. I find it fascinating that so much thought leadership content out there written by law firms and their attorneys have these harsh cuts, almost like a harsh short-formed video cut where it just jumps from paragraph to paragraph, and there's no smooth slide from one paragraph to the next. That's disrespecting an audience. You should be using segues constantly. You can use segues like, but the court wasn't done, or if that wasn't enough, or in a similar vein. These are easy ways to help ease your audience into the next paragraph, the next topic you're going to talk about. It helps them digest the content because it's signifying to them, well, we're done talking about that. Now we're moving to this, or we're going to keep on talking about this to prepare for more information about this topic. Finally, a fifth way you're probably disrespecting the consumers of your thought leadership content. You're burying the lead. You are waiting to the very end, or at least the middle, to explain why something is relevant. Why should your audience consume this piece of content? What will they learn from it? You see this often where you'll have an article about a recent court decision or a piece of legislation, and the entire article, 85% of it, is spent talking about the actual case or the actual piece of legislation, and there's a small bit at the very end talking about the takeaways. Now that ratio is fine as long as you have given, in the beginning, an indication of why the reader should care, why this person should keep reading about this particular case or read an article about this particular piece of legislation or administrative agency action. I also see this a lot when attorneys or legal industry executives are introducing a new concept or a new way of doing things. True thought leadership that's forward-thinking and attempting to shape people's views of the world through the introduction of new concepts, but they don't provide an overview of it. They don't define it or explain the concept. They kind of announce this concept as something that people should be talking about, should be thinking about, should be doing. And then they get into the benefits of that concept. But they haven't explained to you what exactly they're talking about. It's a vague new concept that they have not spent a few paragraphs making you understand what it is, so that way when they talk about the benefits later on, you actually understand. That's disrespectful. It's disrespectful when you bury the lead in your thought leadership content and you don't give your audience a chance to have a quick preview of what's coming, and thus they can decide whether this piece of content they should read and what they should learn from it if they do read it. When you want to build an audience through your thought leadership content, it's not just about sharing the knowledge and wisdom and insights that you have. It's about presenting them in a way that's relevant, valuable, and compelling to your audience. And to do that, you need to respect your audience when you create thought leadership content. If you want to be seen as a thought leader, if you want to build relationships through your thought leadership content, you must respect your audience. No one wants to be disrespected. No one will continue reading your content if you continually disrespect them. If you're interested in learning how to create the kinds of always respectful thought leadership content, check out lawfirmeditorialservice.com. We have over 400 blog posts, videos, and podcast episodes that could help you do just that.